The story of Cain and Abel in the Bible represents perhaps the first harvest festival, first harvest service, as the two brothers bring their offerings from their produce in thanksgiving to God. But it is a harvest that goes horribly wrong. It begins with what seems like an unworthy gift from Cain and descends into jealousy and ends in murder. The story, like so many of the biblical stories, gives us just a bare skeleton. It leaves room for a whole lot of questions. We are not told, for example, what was wrong with Cain's offering. It's left for the reader to speculate and to interpret. Now, some might read the story as history. Others might read it as more of a parable, a story that is true, not necessarily because it happened, but rather it's a story that's true because it happens. It happens in the present tense, in people's lives today. And so it might be regarded by some as an archetypal story. In other words, a stereotypical or paradigmatic story that replays itself over and over again in different ways in human interactions. It describes common patterns of human behavior, and in doing so invites us to look at ourselves and to reflect on our own lives. Interestingly, Cain and Abel, the names appear to have symbolic value. Cain seems to be a play on the Hebrew word kana, meaning to acquire or to get. It seems to suggest that Cain might represent that destructive quality of greed in our humanity that is responsible for so many of the problems that our world struggles with today. Greed, the desire to acquire more and more and more, but to what end? At what cost? Until the blood of others cries out from the ground? Abel's name seems to be a play on the Hebrew word hebel, meaning vapor or breath. It's a word that's used in the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's often translated as meaningless. And yes, sometimes life might feel meaningless and insubstantial, like vapor. But it's perhaps better translated as fleeting. As breath and vapor are fleeting, so Abel is the one who seems to realize just how fleeting and fragile his life is, and how dependent he is on a higher power and a greater wisdom that sustains him. And so perhaps it's for that reason that maybe Abel is able to bring an offering that's worthy, an offering of gratitude, as he becomes aware of just how fleeting his own life is. He responds with gratitude for every precious moment. Every fleeting moment is indeed precious. And so the story of Cain and Abel might ask a number of questions of us. In what way do the characters of Cain and Abel live within us? What does it mean for us to bring of our first fruits to offer them to God? What makes an unworthy offering? Is it possible? Is it possible to bring an unworthy offering to God? Is Cain's offering unacceptable or unworthy because perhaps he doesn't give of his best? Perhaps he gives begrudgingly or half-heartedly. What happens in life when we don't give of our best? When we live only half-heartedly? Does the story suggest that living half-heartedly or begrudgingly, when our hearts are not really in it, is a way of life that undermines the fullness of life? What does it do to the soul when we might be engaged in a job or a career where our heart is not truly in it? Rather than bringing life, it may be undermining our sense of life. The story raises further questions. What happens when jealousy arises within us? How do we deal with our feelings of jealousy and anger in a way that they might not disrupt and destroy or kill our relationships? And perhaps at harvest, the story might ask a further question. When we celebrate the goodness of God and the blessings of the earth, do we have a responsibility to consider the welfare of our neighbours? Am I my brother's keeper or my sister's keeper? This is the question that Cain poses to God when God questions him about the whereabouts of his brother Abel. Cain's first response is to lie. He says, I do not know. And then he asks God the question, am I my brother's keeper? It's a question that is left hanging, a question that each of us must grapple with. Am I my brother's keeper or my sister's keeper? What responsibility do I have towards others in life? And who is my brother or my sister? Before my parents moved here to Northern Ireland, they were living in Chesterfield, and they had some neighbours that they got on really, really well with. The family next door were a kind of a bohemian or kind of a hippie family. They weren't at all religious, and their preteen son who was really quite intelligent, he had already read Stephen Hawking's books on physics and the universe. And by the age of 11, he had decided that he too was an atheist, just like Hawking. The family were not wealthy. The mother earned money by making crocheted objects that she would sell at the festivals during summer. But there was a human goodness within them. My dad found it very striking that when lockdown started, the mother left a thank you note on the bins to thank the bin men who were having to continue working. And they were very friendly and helpful to my parents. Perhaps they were the best neighbours my parents experienced in their 12 years of living in England. When my parents packed up their belongings for their move here to Northern Ireland, the neighbours very kindly offered to help, which was a real lifesaver because my dad was really struggling with his back, which has unfortunately come back at the moment. Afterwards, my parents gave them a gift to say thank you, a gift of money to thank them for their help. And their immediate response was, we'll have to give it to charity. For them, an unexpected gift was something to be shared with others who needed it more than they did. On this Harvest Sunday, as we celebrate the goodness of the earth, as we celebrate its abundance, as we give thanks with our offerings for all that we have received, for God's gift of life that sustains all of life, we end with a beautiful verse from Hebrews 13, verse 16. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased.